This story stayed with me longer than I expected. It's about choices that feel wrong until time passes. It's crafted with heart, and having you listen and stay makes it all worthwhile. Let's dive in.
The city lights of Atlanta blurred through Christopher Mark's floor-to-ceiling windows as he stood in his midtown apartment, a glass of bourbon untouched in his hand. At 30, he had everything he'd worked for: a successful career as a surgeon at Piedmont Atlanta Hospital, a sleek apartment with a view that made visitors gasp, respect from colleagues twice his age. Yet tonight, like most nights, an inexplicable emptiness hollowed out his chest, his blue eyes the color of a clear winter sky, reflected in the dark glass. He ran his fingers through his sandy blonde hair, disheveled from a 12-hour shift. The same thought that had haunted him for a decade crept back in. Somewhere out there, a child, maybe children, walked around with his DNA, his eyes, his smile. A child he would never know. At 20, broke and desperate to pay off crushing student loans, he'd donated sperm to a clinic in Rochester. It had seemed so clinical, so impersonal. Just a transaction. He'd signed away all rights, all claims, all possibility of ever knowing. Back then, it felt like the only choice. Now it felt like he'd given away a piece of his soul. Christopher drained the bourbon and headed to bed. Knowing sleep wouldn't come easy, the ER was chaos the next evening. A typical Saturday night in Atlanta. Christopher moved through it with the calm precision that had earned him his reputation, his white coat pristine despite the surrounding storm of humanity. He was reviewing a chart when a nurse approached. "Dr. Mark, we've got a 9-year-old with a possible fractured wrist. Sports injury, room 4. He grabbed the chart and pushed through the curtain, his practiced smile already in place. "Hello, I'm Dr. Mark, and I—" The words died in his throat. A boy sat on the examination table, cradling his left wrist, his face scrunched in pain but trying to be brave. What stopped Christopher wasn't the injury. It was the boy's eyes, deep brown, expressive, and filled with an old soul's wisdom that seemed impossibly familiar. His rich brown skin glowed under the fluorescent lights, and his tight black curls were still damp with sweat from whatever game had brought him here. "Hi," the boy said quietly, and something in Christopher's chest cracked open. "Hi there, champ." Christopher's voice came out softer than usual. What happened? David went for a header in soccer and landed wrong. Came a voice like warm honey, and Christopher looked up to see a woman rising from the chair in the corner. She was breathtaking. Nancy Edwards stood nearly 5'8", her deep mahogany skin radiant even in the harsh hospital lighting, her dark eyes intelligent and guarded. Assessed him with the sharpness of someone used to reading people, a lawyer's eyes. Her black hair was pulled back in a low bun, a few silver strands at her temples catching the light, adding elegance to her beauty rather than diminishing it. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse, clearly having come from work, and carried herself with a quiet strength that commanded the room. She was at least 40, Christopher guessed. And absolutely magnificent, Mrs. Edwards. He extended his hand, professional despite the strange flutter in his chest. "Miss Edwards," she corrected gently, her handshake firm. "But please, Nancy." Her name felt significant on his tongue. "I'm Dr. Christopher Mark. Let's take a look at this wrist, okay, David?" Expecting the usual wariness children showed doctors. Instead, David looked directly at him and smiled. A real smile, not the forced politeness most kids offered. "You have nice eyes," David said simply. "Like the sky." Christopher laughed, caught off guard. "Well, thank you. That's very kind." As he examined the wrist, asking David about the game, about school, about his favorite soccer players, something extraordinary happened. The conversation flowed. David, who Nancy mentioned, had been quiet and withdrawn since his father's death 3 years ago, talked animatedly about his team, his school project on the solar system, his dream of becoming an astronaut. Christopher found himself completely absorbed, asking follow-up questions, sharing his own childhood dreams, laughing at David's jokes. He barely noticed when he sent David for x-rays with a nurse. So focused was he on the unexpected connection. "He likes you," Nancy said softly when they were alone, and Christopher heard the wonder in her voice. "He hasn't warmed to anyone like this since." She trailed off, pain flickering across her beautiful features. Since his father passed, Christopher finished gently. "I'm sorry for your loss. 3 years ago, car crash." Nancy's fingers twisted the wedding band she still wore. David shut down after. "He's been going through the motions, school, soccer, therapy, but there's been no light in his eyes." Until just now. Christopher's throat tightened. He's a remarkable kid, he is. Nancy studied him with those penetrating eyes. You're good with him. Do you have children? The question hit like a punch. No. I don't. Something in his tone made her tilt her head, but she didn't press. Instead, she said, We just moved to Atlanta 6 months ago. Fresh start. I took a position at Holland and Knight. David's still adjusting. Moving is hard, Christopher said. I moved here from Rochester 2 years ago. Sometimes the city still feels foreign. Yet you stayed. There was nothing left for me there. The honesty surprised him. He rarely shared personal information with patients' families, but something about Nancy made him want to be known. David returned with clear x-rays. Just a bad sprain, not a fracture. Christopher wrapped the wrist, demonstrated care instructions, and wrote a prescription for pain management. He should have said goodbye, moved to the next patient, maintained professional boundaries. Instead, he heard himself say, David, when's your next soccer game? The boy's face lit up. Tuesday at Piedmont Park, 6 o'clock. Would you come? David, Nancy cautioned, Dr. Mark is very busy. I'd love to, Christopher interrupted. Looking directly at Nancy, something passed between them, electric and unexpected. Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment the ER noise faded away. You don't have to, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I want to. And he meant it with an intensity that should have frightened him. Nancy's expression softened, though wariness remained in her eyes. Okay, Tuesday at 6. Piedmont Park, Field 3. As they left, David turned back and waved enthusiastically. Christopher waved back, watching them disappear into the Atlanta night, and felt something he hadn't felt in 10 years. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Later that night, back in his apartment with the city sprawled below him, Christopher couldn't stop thinking about them. About David's easy smile and old soul eyes, about Nancy's guarded beauty, and the strength she wore like armor over grief, about the inexplicable sense that he'd known them before. Somehow, in some impossible way, he pressed his palm against the window, the glass cool beneath his skin. For a decade, he'd mourned the abstract loss of unknown children, had felt guilty for a choice made in desperation. But tonight, for the first time, that hollow ache had been replaced by something else, purpose, connection. A sense of coming home to people he'd just met. Christopher closed his eyes and saw David smile, Nancy's cautious hope. He didn't believe in fate. He was a man of science, of evidence, of measurable reality, but standing there in the dark, feeling more alive than he had in years. He couldn't shake the feeling that Tuesday at Piedmont Park wasn't just another soccer game. It was the beginning of everything. The city lights blurred again, but this time Christopher smiled. Somewhere out there, in a home he'd never seen, a boy and his mother were settling in for the night, and somehow impossibly they'd already changed him. He just didn't know yet that they'd change his entire world. Christopher arrived at Piedmont Park 15 minutes early, his heart hammering like a teenager on a first date. He'd changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on jeans and a fitted navy Henley that Nancy would probably find too casual, too young. He didn't care. He needed to be here. David spotted him immediately and sprinted across the field. Dr. Christopher, you came. Of course I came. Christopher ruffled the boy's curls, the gesture feeling impossibly natural. Wouldn't miss it. Nancy approached more slowly, wearing fitted black yoga pants and an oversized yoga sweatshirt that somehow made her look even more beautiful. Her hair was loose tonight, natural curls framing her face, and Christopher's breath caught. Dr. Mark, she greeted, her lawyer's composure firmly in place. This is unexpected. Christopher, please, and I keep my promises. Something flickered in her dark eyes. Approval, maybe, or warning. David, warm up with your team. Game starts in 10. As David jogged away, Nancy turned to Christopher. You really didn't have to come. I wanted to. He held her gaze. Is that okay? She looked away first toward the field where David was laughing with teammates, a sound she told him she rarely heard anymore. Yes, she admitted quietly. It's okay. They sat on the metal bleachers, their shoulders not quite touching, and watched David play. Christopher had never cared about youth soccer, but tonight he cheered himself hoarse, watching this 9-year-old boy who somehow felt like his own. Over the next 6 weeks, Christopher became a fixture in their lives. He attended every game, helped with David's solar system project, took them to the varsity for burgers where David declared the frosted orange the greatest beverage ever invented. Nancy protested each time. Too much, too generous, too kind. But her resistance weakened with every smile David gave, every laugh that rang out like a miracle. It was during the solar system presentation, watching Christopher and David paint, Jupiter together in Nancy's Buckhead kitchen, their hands covered in red and orange acrylic, that Nancy felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. Christopher caught her staring. What? Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. It was watching this brilliant, accomplished man sit cross-legged on her floor, letting a 9-year-old correct his planet facts, looking more content than he probably did performing life-saving surgeries. Mom's smiling again, David whispered to Christopher, loud enough for her to hear. She hasn't smiled like that since Dad. Christopher's blue eyes found Nancy's across the kitchen, and the naked emotion there, hope, longing, something deeper, made her chest constrict. 2 weeks later, after another soccer game, Christopher asked Nancy to walk with him through Piedmont Park, while David played on the nearby playground, visible but out of earshot. The October air was perfect, cool enough for the light jacket Nancy wore, warm enough that Christopher's hands were tucked in his pockets instead of gloved. Golden light filtered through the trees, painting everything amber and bronze. Nancy, Christopher began, his voice tight with nervousness she'd never heard before. I need to ask you something. She knew what was coming, had felt it building in every shared glance, every accidental touch, every moment he looked at her, like she was the answer to questions he'd been asking his whole life. Don't, she said softly. Don't what? Don't ask what you're about to ask. Christopher stopped walking, turned to face her fully. How do you know what I'm about to ask? Because I see it every time you look at me, Christopher. Her voice cracked on his name. And we can't, why not? His hands came out of his pockets, reaching for hers, and she let him take them because she was weak, because his touch sent electricity up her arms. Nancy, I know this is complicated. I know I'm younger, I know David's been through trauma. I know you're still grieving Ben. But what I feel for you, you're 30 years old, she interrupted, pulling her hands away though it physically hurt. You should be dating women your own age, going to clubs, living your life, not playing house with a 40-year-old widow and her grieving son. Grieving? Christopher's voice went sharp with emotion. Nancy, grief isn't a burden, and David isn't some complication I'm taking on. He's an incredible kid who's been through something devastating. And you. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the gold flecks in his blue eyes. You think I care about your age. You think I'm playing house. Nancy, I'm falling in love with you, with both of you. I have been since that first night in the ER. Nancy's breath caught. Christopher, 6 weeks. He continued, passionate and raw. 6 weeks of watching you be the strongest, most brilliant woman I've ever met. 6 weeks of watching David come alive. 6 weeks of feeling like I finally understand what home means. Don't tell me that doesn't mean anything to you. It means everything, she whispered, tears threatening. That's why I can't. Don't you see? David's attached to you. If this doesn't work, if you realize you want someone younger, someone whose life isn't already full of grief and responsibility, he'll lose another father figure. I can't let that happen. I won't. I'm not going anywhere. You don't know that. You can't promise that. Christopher cupped her face with both hands, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. Then let me prove it. Let me take you to dinner. Let me show you that this isn't some quarter-life crisis or a phase. Let me... No. She stepped back, breaking contact, wrapping her arms around herself. I'm sorry, Christopher. The answer is no. She walked back toward the playground, leaving him standing alone in the golden light, and didn't let herself cry until she was safely in her car that night. David already asleep in the back seat. Christopher didn't stop coming to games, didn't stop helping with homework, didn't stop showing up, reliable as sunrise, asking nothing in return. Nancy tried to create distance, but he was patient, constant, and she realized with growing fear that she was falling just as hard. It was during a cold November evening, 3 months after they'd met, when everything shattered. Nancy's phone rang during a late meeting at Holland and Knight. David's school. Her blood turned to ice at the nurse's trembling voice. Miss Edwards, David collapsed during PE. We've called an ambulance. They're taking him to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. She broke every traffic law getting there, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel. The ER was a blur of white coats and medical jargon, until a doctor with kind eyes and grey hair said the words that destroyed her world. We need to run more tests, but the preliminary blood work indicates leukemia. Nancy stopped breathing. Miss Edwards, do you understand what I'm saying? She couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process that her baby, her miracle, her reason for living, had cancer. Nancy, Christopher's voice, Christopher's hands on her shoulders, steady and warm. When had he arrived? How did he know? The school called me as your emergency contact, he said quietly, answering her unspoken question. I came straight from surgery. She collapsed against him, and he held her while the world ended. His arms the only solid thing in a universe gone liquid with terror. Over the next 2 weeks, as David underwent test after test, Christopher was there. Not as a doctor. He'd immediately recused himself from David's care, but as something more essential. He brought Nancy coffee when she forgot to eat, sat with David through the scary procedures, explained medical terminology in plain English when the oncologists overwhelmed her. Why are you doing this? Nancy asked one night in the hospital waiting room, exhausted and raw. I turned you down, Christopher. I pushed you away. He looked at her with those clear blue eyes, now rimmed with exhaustion that matched her own. Because I love you, both of you. And love doesn't stop just because it's inconvenient or complicated or unrequited. You needed me, so I'm here. I'll always be here. Nancy broke then, really broke, sobbing into his chest while he held her and whispered promises against her hair. And though she still couldn't say yes to forever, she finally stopped pushing him away. Sometimes she was learning, love looked like showing up, and Christopher Mark kept showing up. The oncologist's office smelled of antiseptic and false hope. Nancy sat rigid in the chair, her fingers twisted together so tightly, her knuckles had gone pale against her mahogany skin. Christopher stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder, a touch she'd finally stopped resisting. David needs a bone marrow transplant, Dr. Rivera said, her voice professionally gentle. We've tested you, Miss Edwards, and unfortunately you're not a compatible match. The words hit like bullets. Nancy made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob, and Christopher's hand tightened on her shoulder. What about donors, he asked, his surgeon's voice steady, though Nancy could feel him trembling. The registry. We've already started the search, but finding a match can take time. Weeks, sometimes months, and David, Dr. Rivera, hesitated. His type of leukemia is aggressive. Time isn't something we have in abundance. Nancy stood abruptly, the chair scraping against linoleum. Excuse me. She walked out, needing air, needing space, needing this to not be real. Christopher found her in the hospital chapel, empty at this hour. Just her and the stained glass and a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. I can't lose him, she whispered, staring at the abstract Jesus in the colored glass. I survived losing Ben. I won't survive losing David. Christopher sat beside her, their thighs touching on the wooden pew. You won't lose him. You don't know that. No, he admitted. But I know we'll do everything possible. Every option, every donor, every... Test me. Nancy's head snapped up. What? Christopher leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly. Let them test me. For a match. Christopher, the odds of a random person being compatible are... I don't care about the odds. His voice was firm, determined. Nancy, I care about David. I care about you. If there's even a chance I could help him, I have to try. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. You don't have to do this. The procedure, the recovery, the risks, I want to. He reached for her hands, holding them tightly. Please, let me do this. Let me be tested. Nancy searched his face, those clear blue eyes so full of love and conviction, and saw something that terrified and comforted her in equal measure. He meant every word. Okay, she whispered, her voice breaking. Okay. 3 days later, Christopher sat in Dr. Rivera's office, Nancy beside him, both braced for disappointment. Dr. Rivera looked at the results, then at Christopher, then back at the results. I've been doing this for 20 years, she said slowly, and I've never seen a match this perfect outside of siblings. Nancy's hand found Christopher's, crushing it. What are you saying? I'm seeing Dr. Mark is a 10 out of 10 match. Perfect HLA compatibility. It's extraordinary, honestly. The statistical probability of a non-related donor being this compatible is... I'll do it, Christopher interrupted. Whatever David needs, whenever he needs it. I'll do it. Dr. Rivera smiled. Let's schedule the procedure. As they left the office, Nancy's legs gave out in the hallway. Christopher caught her, holding her against his chest as she shook with sobs. Relief, gratitude, overwhelming emotion she couldn't name. Why, she gasped against his shirt. Why would you do this? The surgery, the recovery, the risks, Christopher, why? He tilted her face up, his thumbs wiping away tears. Hen spoke with devastating honesty. Because I love you, Nancy. Because I love David like he's my own. Because the day I met you both, something in my life finally made sense. I want to be part of your family. However you'll have me. If it's as a friend, as David's donor, as someone who loves you from a distance, I'll take it. But I'm not going anywhere. Not now, not ever. You're stuck with me. Nancy's knees buckled, and she collapsed against his chest, her composure finally shattering completely. Christopher wrapped his arms around her, holding her steady as she sobbed, relief, gratitude, fear, and overwhelming emotion pouring out in waves. I'm scared, she whispered against his shirt, her voice muffled and broken. Me too, he admitted, his chin resting on top of her head, his own voice thick with emotion. But we'll be scared together. She pulled back just enough to look up at him, tears streaming down her face, and placed her palm against his cheek. No words were adequate. No thank you would ever be enough. So she just held his gaze, letting him see everything she felt, everything she still couldn't say. Christopher covered her hand with his, understanding passing between them without language. The surgery was scheduled for the following week. Christopher spent the days before it at their house, his presence no longer questioned, just necessary. He read to David, played video games with him, explained the procedure in terms a 9-year-old could understand without being frightened. You're giving me your bone marrow, David asked, his brown eyes wide. A little bit, yeah. So your body can make healthy blood cells again. Will it hurt? Christopher could have lied. Instead, he said gently, a little for both of us. But pain is temporary, buddy. Getting you healthy, that's forever. David hugged him fiercely. I love you, Dr. Christopher. Christopher's arms came around the boy, his eyes meeting Nancy's across the room, and his voice broke as he whispered, I love you too, David, so much. The transplant procedure went flawlessly. Christopher woke in recovery with Nancy sitting beside his bed, her hand wrapped around his. David? He asked immediately, throat raw. Better, so much better, thanks to you. Nancy's smile was watery, as she raised his hand to her lips, kissing his knuckles. You saved my son's life, Christopher Mark. I just did what anyone who loves him would do, he said quietly. Nancy studied his exhausted face, the sincerity in those blue eyes. Not anyone, you. You showed up, you stayed. You gave everything without asking for anything in return. He's an incredible kid, Christopher said, his voice thick with emotion. Being part of his life, even in this small way, it means everything to me. She stroked his sandy blonde hair, watched the tenderness in his expression, and felt something shift irrevocably in her chest. This man, this beautiful, selfless, impossibly kind man, had given everything without asking for anything in return. When you're healed, she said quietly, I'm going to take you to dinner. A real date. No more excuses about age or baggage or fear. You've earned that much. Christopher's smile lit up the sterile room. I'll hold you to that. 2 months later, David's recovery was miraculous. The leukemia was in remission, his energy returning, his laughter filling their Buckhead home again. Nancy invited Christopher for dinner to celebrate. Just the three of them, family style. David talked non-stop through the meal, excited about returning to soccer, about the Christmas break coming up, about the new telescope Christopher had bought him. Nancy watched them together. Christopher's patience infinite, David's adoration absolute, and felt her heart expand until it ached. After dinner, after David finally fell asleep, reading astronomy books with Christopher curled up beside him, Nancy gently extracted them both. She covered David with a blanket, then led Christopher outside to the portico. The December air was crisp, the Atlanta skyline twinkling in the distance. They sat on the porch swing, a blanket across their laps, and Nancy finally let herself be vulnerable. I was 28 when I met Ben, she began. He was everything I thought I wanted, stable, successful, safe. We had a good marriage. Not passionate, not earth-shattering, but good, comfortable. When he died, I thought that was it for me. One great love, one chance at happiness. Christopher stayed quiet, letting her speak. Then you walked into that ER, and everything I thought I knew became irrelevant. She turned to face him, her dark eyes luminous in the porch light. You terrify me, Christopher. The way I feel about you, it's not comfortable or safe. It's consuming. It's like trying to breathe underwater. and realizing you don't need air anymore. You just need this. Nancy, I'm falling in love with you, she interrupted, voice shaking. I've been falling since that first day, and I'm done fighting it. Christopher cupped her face, his touch reverent. Say that again. I love you, Christopher Mark. I love your kindness, your dedication, the way you love my son like he's yours. I love. He kissed her, deep and slow and full of promise. This wasn't gratitude or relief or desperation. This was choice. This was forever beginning. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and smiling, Christopher pressed his forehead to hers. I've been waiting to hear those words since October. I'm sorry it took so long. You were worth waiting for. You both were. They stayed on that portico until dawn, talking and kissing and planning a future that finally felt possible. And when the sun rose over Atlanta, painting everything gold, Nancy thought maybe, just maybe, second chances were real after all. Nancy woke in Christopher's arms, morning light streaming through her bedroom window. They'd moved inside around dawn, exhausted and happy, and she'd finally let him stay. His chest rose and fell beneath her cheek, steady as a heartbeat, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt complete. She traced idle patterns on his skin, her fingers following the contours of his ribs. When she felt it, a small raised mark just below his left pectoral, a mole. Her hand froze. She lifted her head slowly, examining it in the pale light. Oval-shaped, dark brown, distinctive. Exactly like no, her heart began to race. She carefully extracted herself from Christopher's embrace, pulling on her robe with shaking hands. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, trying to breathe, trying to think rationally. It was a coincidence. Plenty of people had moles. The same shape, the same location, the same... David's door was cracked open. Nancy pushed inside, finding her son still asleep, his shirt riding up from restless dreams. There, below his left rib cage, was the mole she'd kissed 1,000 times, the mark she'd traced while he nursed as a baby, identical. Nancy's legs went weak. She stumbled to the bathroom, gripping the sink, staring at her reflection. Mother's intuition, that primal, inexplicable knowing, screamed through every cell of her body. The perfect bone marrow match, the instant connection, the way Christopher looked at David like he was seeing himself. The mole. No, she whispered to her reflection. No, no, no. But even as she denied it, she knew. Christopher found her in the kitchen an hour later. 2 coffee mugs on the counter, her face carefully composed. Morning, beautiful. He kissed her temple, reaching for his mug, and Nancy had to force herself not to flinch. Last night was perfect, she finished, her voice hollow. It was perfect. He studied her, those clear blue eyes too perceptive. What's wrong? Nothing. I'm fine. Nancy, I need to run errands. She grabbed both mugs, dumping his coffee down the sink before he could finish it. David has soccer practice at 10. Can you take him? Christopher's confusion was evident, but he nodded. Of course. Are you sure you're okay? Positive. The lie tasted like ash. The DNA testing facility in Buckhead was clinical and efficient. Nancy sat in her car afterward. 2 cotton swabs in sealed bags on the passenger seat, one from Christopher's coffee mug, one from David's juice glass, and felt like a traitor.